Fire Emblem Awakening, a game that is said to have saved Fire Emblem as a whole. But we're not going to be talking about that. Instead, today, we're going to see if I can beat Fire Emblem Awakening with only one character. And if you saw the thumbnail, you know that one character is Tharja. Now, why her? Well, the wholesome side of me really likes mage classes in Fire Emblem. But the true reason is because I'm a degenerate, just like you watching. Don't lie to me. Anyway, normally I would yap about the rules of the challenge right here, but I'll save that for when we actually recruit Tharja. But what I will yap about is how you should subscribe to the channel and like the video if you enjoy content like this. So now with that shameless plug over with, let's start the game. Firstly, I have to create my Robin, but because I won't be using him at all after the first few chapters, he really doesn't matter that much. But one thing I do use him for is to kill Chrom off in the prologue, so good job Robin. And speaking about Chrom, we officially meet him in chapter 1, after he conveniently finds us just in a field, out here, for some reason. Anyway, with him accompanying us, we head to a nearby village that just so happens to be under attack by bandits. So to make Chrom's party less suspicious of me, we decide to help him out in this battle. And here's where you get your standard Fire Emblem lineup. You have the sword-wielding protagonist, the fairly broken mage, the healer that falls in one hit, and of course your pre-promote that sweeps the entire map for you. And once the entire map is swept, we continue our track to Ylistal. Well, that is before these corpses start attacking us. But luckily, Marth from the hit game Super Smash Bros. Comes to help us. And that's not all, because we get Sully and Varion during this map. But still, Frederick makes the enemies pick a god and pray. So with that, we finally reach the kingdom of Ylistal, where Robin officially joins the Shepherds as their new tactician. And for the first mission, we have to make an expedition to Ferox. And of course, along the way, we run into more Risen. And despite having more units than before, you can guess who carried us the victory in this battle. But luckily after this, Frederick gets to take a break for the rest of the game, because when we reach the Long Fort guarding the entrance to Ferox, we get attacked by their knights, because neither party was really good with negotiations, especially Chrom, but we'll see how bad he is at it later on. But for now, like I was saying, Frederick gets to take a break, because during this chapter, I unlocked the preparation screen. Not really that exciting, I know, but this allows me to select the units for the map. And speaking about maps, you recruit Tharja on the chapter 9 map. And because Awakening only has 26 chapters, I thought that waiting halfway through a game to start a challenge wouldn't be a good idea. So with the power of a save editor, I was able to import Tharja so that I could use her as early as chapter 3, thus being able to officially start this challenge. So now, on to the rules. Firstly, the only unit I can utilize is Tharja. Secondly, in the same vein as Rule 1, I'm not allowing team-ups or follow-up attacks. In addition to this, I can only do story maps, so no side content is allowed. And finally, I must be playing on hard mode. So now with that all being said, let's get on with chapter 3. Now because I ripped Tharja's data from chapter 9, she starts off at level 10, which sounds like a lot until you realize that you get Kelm at level 5 during this map. So despite her being over leveled, that's not what makes this map easy. What makes it easy is El Thunder and Nosferatu. Pretty good magic for this early in the game, so Raimi doesn't stand a chance. And with that, we can get out of the cold, which is a good thing given that Tharja is just in a cape and panties. Anyway, once in Ferox, we agree to a tournament battle so that we can get Flava as an ally. And of course, our opponent is Marth from the hit game Super Smash Bros. But moving on, notice how the win condition for this map is to rout all enemies. Well, keep that in mind for later. But for now, Tharja gets her first critical hit of the run, and be very, very prepared to see a lot more of them. Like for example, the critical hit she gets on Marth. So with that fight done, we set up an alliance with the Eastern Khan. Good job us. But our victory is short-lived, because back at Ylistal, Maribel well, ends up getting kidnapped by King Chud because he really wants the Fire Emblem. You know, the thing that the series is named after. But when we hit him with that he threatens to start a war. But even though we don't want that, it happens anyway, so yippee. Anyway, this battle was tough, not due to the enemies. If anything, Tharja makes quick work of them, but due to Chrom. Because if he falls in battle, then you automatically lose the game. And even with Tharja playing the best defense she could, enemies would still always lock on the Chrom. Because if you watched my last video, then you know that the AI in Fire Emblem will always target a weaponless unit first. So really the only way to ensure that Chrom doesn't spontaneously explode so that I could beat this level was to have him team up with Tharja. But that's how losers think. So instead, I just edited Chrom in the save editor to remove the flag that makes him mandatory in battle. That way, I could have a true Tharja only run without needing to babysit Chrom. So Tharja could do what Tharja does best and wipes all the enemies off the map, just in time for us to arrive back at Ylistal to stop the ambush at the castle. Now remember how I said to keep an eye on the win conditions? Well, this is the third map in a row where I have to defeat all enemies. And when you defeat an enemy, you get XP for it. Common knowledge, right? Well, what I'm trying to say is that Tharja is already level 20, and with her base growth rate along with the Dark Mage growth rate, her stats for this early in the game are pretty good, especially health and defense wise. And luckily for me, even though her resistance is low, a lot of early game enemies don't really use magic. Well, I say that, but then the boss of this map, Baladar, uses magic. But who needs good resistance when you can always land critical hits instead? So with a failed attempt to take Emerine's life, we decide that it's the best move to move her out of the castle. And when we do that, we get ambushed again. And this time, the enemies have wyverns. But luckily, I gave Tharja wind magic so that she could do more damage to the wyvern riders. But it really didn't matter what magic she used because, well, I think you know why. But anyway, after the battle, Emerine decides to go back, as to not cause any more trouble for us. But then she causes more trouble for us by getting kidnapped. So now we gotta save her. And just like the last map, Chapter 8 really had nothing going on. But by speaking to this villager, I was able to get a Master Seal. So after the battle, I decided to make Tharja a Dark Knight. So say goodbye to Tharja's underwear. I know you guys will lament that loss, but I mainly did it for the extra movement, as well as Slow Burn and Life Taker are pretty good skills. And stat-wise, Sorcerer would be better because of the 5 extra growth points in resistance, but surely that won't come back to bite me in the ass later. And while I'm at it, speaking about skills, Tharja has 2, Hex and Anathema. Essentially both skills just lower an enemy's chance to dodge and attack. But now, on to Chapter 9. Now you would think with Tharja being a Dark Knight and all, that would be the scariest unit on this map. And you would be right. But also Libra is on this map as a green unit. And thanks to his killer axe, he takes care of most enemies for me. And speaking about enemies, I make Tharja kill off Tharja. To any normal person, this would probably mess them up for life. But to Tharja, it's probably just another Tuesday. But hey, I get an extra L Thunder out of it, so that's pretty good. Anyway, after the battle, Gangrel makes us choose between the Fire Emblem or Emerine's life. And well, we don't get to choose because Emerine chooses for us. But with his army outnumbering my units, we have no choice but to flee. And as we do, we end up getting ourselves into yet another battle. But after 6 consecutive battles of routing enemies, I finally get a map where I just need to defeat the commander. And because I put Tharja on horseback, getting to Mustafa was really easy and taking him out was even easier. Then once we learn that Gangrel's army has an opening for a counterattack, we launch our units, aka our one-woman army, to go face King Chud once and for all. Now, in Awakening, I've noticed that the game loves to swarm me with enemies, and while they don't do that much to Tharja, as well as Tharja can easily delete them from the game entirely, my main concern for the future maps is running out of magic, because unlike in Fates, you have durability on your weapons. avoidance. But other than that, luckily when the swarm of enemies did attack, I had a surplus of concoctions at the ready. Not even mentioning the amount of abandoned fortresses on this map for Tharja to hide in. Plus, at this point she learned Slow Burn that adds +1 hit and avoidance for 15 turns. So most enemies couldn't even touch her. And when they did, they barely did anything to her. Maybe this is why they don't give you Tharja in the early game. But regardless, with all those factors listed above, taking out Gangrel was as easy as finding a degenerate in a mirror. And with his defeat, Prom takes over in his sister's stead and gets married to a random maiden, unlike in my first playthrough where he NTR'd Sully from me. Anyway, after a 2-year time skip, we meet with Virion, you know, the bow guy from chapter 1 that I barely mentioned. Well, it turns out that he's a pretty important person. Well, not that important to the point where I'll be mentioning him again, but his home territory was captured by Emperor Walhart, and Walhart just so happens to have his eyes set on Ylistel as well. So now we have to take care of that threat. But luckily for us, we have our own threat, because Tharja learns Life Taker during this next map. That allows her to heal 50% of her HP when defeating an enemy on her turn. And because Tharja pretty much one-shots all enemies at this point, she essentially has infinite HP as of right now. So getting through this battle was a breeze. And after the battle, we decide to counterattack the rest of Walhart's men at sea. But the problem is that neither Ylistel nor Ferox has ships, but Plegia does. You know, the kingdoms whose king we sliced down earlier. So even though that happened, their new king Valadar gives us a pretty generous offer. Wait a minute. Anyway, him and his freaky ass copy of Robin will have to wait until later on to be important, because first we still need to defeat Walhart. And that's not really going to be much of an issue at this point, because the next handful of maps were brain off levels of easy, because chapter 13 only lasted 3 turns. And here we learn that Marth is actually Lucina from the hit game Super Smash Bros. And as for chapter 14, the only interesting thing that happens is that Tharja gets to level 20 for the second time during this run. And looking at her stats, it's no wonder she's cleaning up these maps. But you see that resistance? Well, we'll get into it later. But for now, chapter 15 goes exactly as you would imagine it. And during Tharja's Bloodshed Fest, we meet Sairi, a member of the resistance against Walhart. And with her, she leads us to Tiki. But of course, this comes with yet another battle. But I actually lose here because one of the enemies pops counter, so that I lose my HP along with them. But running it back, the usual happens. So we were able to protect Tiki so she can give us a gem for the Fire Emblem, because that thing Valadar worships is going to be coming to life very, very soon. But again, that's for later, because right now we have to capture one of Walhart's strongholds. And around this time, I was actually losing confidence in this video, because, well, I didn't think that Tharja could become this broken, but I was very, very wrong. And I thought it might not be interesting just to hear me yap about Tharja slaughtering units like how a gacha gamer goons the waifus. Trust me, I should know. But that was before I entered the late game. As for now, I defeat Pharos, we learn that Walhart and Yinfei are on their way to the stronghold. So we might be a little fucked. So we decide to split up into 2 armies to scatter their men. Firstly, we have Tharja, who went after Yinfei. And while this map has a gimmick of turning the floor into a hazard when stepped on, that wasn't my issue with the map. The issue was that Tharja constantly got bottlenecked by enemies, thus needing to defeat the enemies to get the Yinfei, and that would cause her to run out of magic. Multiple times actually. But the easy solution for that was to just buy her more magic. So I did. And I realized I never mentioned what magic I've been using, but then again, it's nothing special, because I've just been using thunder magic and the occasional fire magic from enemy drops. Because for some reason, despite being called Dark Knight, this class can't use dark magic. magic. And I understand why giving a tank the ability to nuke would make them overpowered as all hell. But regardless, once I did get the Yin Fei, I did run out of magic. But I did have swords because that's a benefit of being a Dark Knight. And even though he pops both Astra and Vantage, they don't do much. Actually, Vantage does nothing, so I was able to finish him off. And at the same time this was going on, Basilio was taking care of Walhart, and maybe we should have sent Tharja instead. But with his final bit of strength, he gives Flavia one of the gems so she can give it to Crom. And with his sacrifice, we now have an opening to counterattack Walhart. And this map started to show how difficult this challenge actually was. Because remember how I said during the Gangrel fight that the game loves to overwhelm you with enemies? Well, that happens an ass ton during this map, because Walmart will constantly call in reinforcements, draining up most, if not all, my magic. And secondly, Tharja is getting to the point where she can't one-shot enemies, so healing every turn off Life Taker was getting harder and harder. But luckily for me, just like with the Gangrel fight, this map also has fortresses and woods for Tharja to take refuge in. And that was really the only way I could push her up the map to get to Walhart. And luckily for me, Buddy doesn't last long thanks to Tharja's iconic critical hits, causing him to flee to his castle. Now, in his castle, I couldn't send Tharja straight up the middle due to the swarm of enemies that would surround her, so I opted for going up the side path instead. And even though I still got surrounded by enemies, it was easier to filter them out than going through the middle. Really, my only worry on this map was the mages, especially Excellus, because Bolgannon can cause Tharja to go from full health to half HP in just one turn. Luckily for me, getting elixirs in Awakening isn't hard, and I was able to defeat Excellus on their second turn. Then with nobody in my way, I was finally able to reach Walhart, and in order to defeat him, I had to cheese this fight by not attacking him directly, but instead the surrounding units I left alive so that I could use them to refill my HP with Life Taker. Then once they were all gone, I pulled out the Bulganian I got from Excellus to finish him off once and for all. And to say thanks, Sayri gives us another gem for the Fire Emblem. Yippee. But you know what isn't yippee? That is Valadar, you know, the evil guy, turns out to actually be evil and sets up an ambush for us at his castle. So we have to deal with that now. And this is the hardest map I've had to deal with in this challenge, all because of the move Mirror, a dark magic attack that instead attacks a wide area instead of a 1x2 space. Now the move only has a 30% chance to land, but if it does land, I can kiss 1/6 of her health goodbye, which doesn't sound like a lot, but given that these mages spawn outside the map means that I can't eliminate every single one of them. So they'll be here the whole map, chipping down my HP. That's also not mentioning the other enemies that flood this map as well. So how did I do it? Well, just like chapter 19, I had to take advantage of my environment and had to hide Tharja in stairs and pillars in order to survive. It also helped that I made a lucky mistake at the end of the map by procting the mini boss to come and attack me, but luckily I had Bulganian equipped, so I was able to finish him off and beat the chapter. But if I had any other magic equipped, I would have been dead meat. So luckily these late game levels are making me think more, and it isn't just Tharja's fat ass sitting on top of a horse blowing everything up, is what I would have said if it wasn't for the next level, because it wasn't difficult at all. It was straight up impossible. Because excluding Aversa, there's only 12 units on this map. But because there's so few, they make them all harder to beat, because they're buffed beyond comprehension. Like, I can't even make it to Aversa to land an attack, because one of the mages next to her will insta-kill me on sight, due to me neglecting Tharja's resistance. But because that mage was on her right side, I thought I could run along the left side of the map to get to her. And after a lucky crit taking out the Bow Knight, I was able to easily defeat the Berserker and the following Dark Knight. might. But apparently, after defeating 3 enemies on this map, that procs the rest of them to come and hunt you down. So there went that strategy. Next, because I realized I didn't have a rule against meat shields, actually this is editing me, turns out that rule 1 specifically said no meat shields, but you're gonna see why it doesn't matter in a sec. I thought that I could use some to distract the 4 enemies guarding a Versa, but that could only really work if I had units that could take more hits, because all of them could only survive 1 attack, and there was no way I was defeating a Versa in a single turn. Finally, I tried devolving Tharja back into a Dark Mage to use Mirror on her, but I couldn't even get into Mirror range because that would proc the enemies guarding her. So I really had no other choice but to defeat this map on normal mode, thus breaking the rules of my challenge. Now I do think that this map would have been possible if I had planned for it by making Tharja a sorcerer right after maxing her out in the Dark Knight class, but I didn't, and that cost me this run. Luckily, because I'm using a save editor this challenge, I can switch back to hard mode, but regardless, I lost this challenge here. And because I only have like 4 more chapters after this, I decided that I might as well finish the game for the sake of entertainment. And speaking about changing Tharja's class, on the next map, Crom and Robin have to fight Valadar. But because I removed their flags to spawn into the maps, nobody spawns up there with Valadar. And I thought I soft-locked the game, because in order to break this barrier, you have to defeat Valadar first. But then I remembered the mirror trick I tried before from the last map. So I turned Tharja back into a Dark Mage. I know I could have gone for a Sorcerer, but you D-gens can thank me later, okay? Anyway, luckily her stats don't take that bad of a fall, and even if they did, it wouldn't have mattered, because I utilized the iconic strategy of staying inside the pillars while every enemy came to me. And after clearing them all out, I got into mirror range and used it to knock out Valadar. And then after Basilio reveals his epic troll of staying alive, I have to fight Valadar for real this time. But luckily he spawns right next to a staircase, so I can hide in it and get an advantage in this fight. And after we celebrate his defeat, the freaky ass copy of Robin appears, revealing that he's Grima, and now he's going to descend upon the world as his epic troll. So we gotta stop that now. So in order to figure out how we can defeat him, we decide to ask Naga about it. And as we make our way there, another ambush happens, for like the 5th time now. But luckily for me, just before this fight, I fixed my mistake and made Tharja a sorcerer, so that way she can get some more resistance for the upcoming rematch against Aversa. But as for this map, I know I said that late game maps were hard, but this map, I just utilized the iconic strategy of hiding Tharja in a fortress and letting the enemies come to her. And during this battle, she unlocks Vengeance, which does more damage to an enemy based on the user's HP. But because Tharja is always at full HP, it doesn't really matter that much. But more damage is more damage, so that's always good. And again, she does a lot of damage, mainly because once she unlocks it, it becomes rarer for her not to use it than it would be for her to use it. Anyway, after learning that Robin might die if we kill Grima, we decide to take that chance and track down the dragon. But before we can get to it, Aversa wants a rematch, and I want a part of this rematch as well. Now, this map is like Chapter 19 all over again, mainly because enemies will swarm around me like neckbeards at an anime convention. Trust me, I would know. But luckily, I have woods and fortresses to hide Tharja in. But what makes it more difficult is that I only have 2 turns to defeat Aversa before more enemies spawn in at the top and eradicate Tharja. So this map took a couple tries, but with Tharja popping Vengeance at 4 health, she was finally able to deal 60 points of damage to Aversa, getting her revenge for what happened on Chapter 22. But now, with nothing stopping us, we can finally take down the failed dragon Grima. And at first, I thought this was going to be impossible, like Chapter 22, because you are flooded with enemies to the point where I would either run out of magic or just fall in battle due to the sheer amount of them. And if I'm being honest, I probably wouldn't have been able to defeat this map if it wasn't for me actually turning the gears in my head for once. Because I thought to myself, wouldn't it be nice if Life Taker healed me after every turn. And then I remembered that I could heal myself after every turn by spamming Nosferatu. So I loaded up on Nosferatu and went to town on the enemies in this map, because if they couldn't one-shot me, then they couldn't beat me, because Tharja almost had 80 health points at this point. Then once I got close to Grima, I used Nosferatu on him, chipping away at his health until I ran out. Then, in a last-ditch effort, I pulled out Gotia and used it against him. And luckily he fell hook, line, and sinker for my trap, because the more damage he did to me, the more damage I was able to do to him with Vengeance. And with the final attack, I managed to do just enough damage to finish him off. Well, I say that, but actually you have to choose whether Chrom or Robin finishes him off. And I decide not to go the doomed Yowie route and have Chrom defeat him, so that Robin can stay alive. Now with Grima defeated, the game ends with one last sexy picture of Chrom, and as the screen fades to black and the battle data rolls. So, can you defeat Fire Emblem Awakening with only Tharja? Well, I know you can, I just failed to do it in this video, but there's always Lunatic mode, if you guys are interested in seeing me do that challenge. But if you watch this far into the video, that probably means that you've enjoyed it, so a like and subscribe are always appreciated to show me that you did enjoy this. But regardless, thank you all so much for watching, and remember to have a fantastic day.